Hello and welcome to the next episode of Lost in Criterion. I'm John Patrick Owatari Dorgan, and with me today is a man who wages an incessant, merciless battle between the spirit and the flesh in the arena of his soul.
I am the Adam Glass, and don't we all, Pat? Don't we all? At some level, I know some people like to downplay what they're doing, but everybody, that's part of the human condition.
To be fair, I decided I picked that because I liked that quote a lot. I thought it was very nice at the beginning of the movie. I thought it fit the movie quite well, considering it's from the book. So hey, there's no guarantee that the book and the quote would match, okay? Or the book and the movie would match.
On that, what we're quoting, Nikos Kazantzakis. It's
the worst,
Greek.
The hardest pronounced name ever.
Kazantzakis. Zakis, I believe is actually how it is. I really don't know his Greek. That's from his novel and quoted right at the head of the film adaptation of The Last Temptation of Christ, Martin Scorsese's 1988 film of the same name. I guess I'll add, starring Willem Dafoe, who we've seen before in Fishing with John, and also starring John Laurie as the Apostle James, who gets a good 2 minutes talking about fishing at one point in the movie, and you won't even notice it's him because he has a beard.
Yeah, no, I didn't notice.
Barbara Hershey won a Golden Globe for her role as Mary Magdalene in this film. Harvey Keitel won a Razzie for his role as Judas.
Was he really that bad?
Well, I didn't
think he was that bad.
The principal complaints are an active choice by the makers of the movies to not have anyone speak the Queen's Latin, I believe is how TV Tropes refers to it. How everyone in ancient Rome speaks with a British accent. They decided not to have anyone speak in any accent. So the only actual British high British accent we get is David Bowie as Pontius Pilate being David Bowie.
Right, which we all just accept because
David Bowie. That's how David Bowie talks anyway. So it doesn't really matter. This is a highly, highly controversial movie. Especially, it came out in 1988, which is the height of the codifying years of the religious right in America, and the religious right did not like this movie at all. But I
like to believe that this movie is the reason why the religious right exists.
Well, it kind of is. It cemented a lot of.
Well, no, it reminds me of some of those kind of like the things that you see in history after that, of like those sort of, this is another thing that we need to rally against.
Well, yeah, I mean, the abortion debate is obviously a big thing. The abortion debate is obviously a big thing.
Well, right.
In rallying the political movement within the conservative Christian communities. But this movie, really, everybody was talking out against this, and it came out in the wake of the Jim Bakker and Jimmy Swaggart controversies, sex and money, and blah, blah, blah. So it was a time when these groups were already on the defensive, and in America, that was at least less violent than in other places. In America, we had the head of Campus Crusade for Christ offering to buy the negative from Universal. If they wouldn't burn it, he would pay for it and burn it himself. In other places, we had French fundamentalist Christians attacking a Parisian theater with Molotov cocktails, injuring 13 people, burning many of them quite badly, and forcing the closure of the theater for 3 years. Yeah.
Wow.
They were eventually tied to sort of disenfranchised followers of an excommunicated Catholic priest. So it's got its own really. When we watched Life of Brian, which I think this movie this is a weird companion piece to this movie.
Oh, I know, but it's amazing how well they fit together.
But when we talked about Life of Brian, we talked about the splintering of extremist groups and how any small amount of difference becomes insurmountable.
Right.
So
yeah.
these are the people of a very violent end, and while there are American groups that were just as angry, I suppose, they didn't actually act out in violence. There were people picketing the home of the head of MCA, Universal's parent company at the time, with signs demonstrating that they believed that this was a film financed by the Jews.
Oh, man. Goodness gracious.
So there's that. Nikos Kazantzakis, I think I actually said it right that time. Being Greek,
and then Najad.
Eventually, he self-identified as an atheist, but he was raised Greek Orthodox as a Greek. So that's the religious background. He's coming out of Martin Scorsese is Roman Catholic, and Paul Schrader, I believe, is Catholic as well. The screenwriter, Paul Schrader.
Okay.
So, there's a religious basis in this movie. It's not.
Well, there would have to be.
In any case, it is not some sort of vast Jewish conspiracy.
Right, yeah, like. But try telling that to the vast Jewish conspiracy sort.
Yes.
Okay. Your words fall on deaf ears, Adam.
Exactly. So a lot of rather unchristian behavior going on around the start of this movie. It is still banned in Singapore and the Philippines and one other country, but I can't remember what.
Japan.
I don't think it's Japan, but
I kid.
You should be careful.
Impossible.
I sat down and watched this with a fan of Kazantzaki's work, with a fan of this movie, my friend Thanasi Thomas, who is a Greek Orthodox monk, or was at some point. He's for another few days, he is my roommate. He's been living with us for about 6 months, but he's found better doors. He's a 60-year-old man, and it's been an amazing experience living with him. He's a very, very interesting fellow. But watching this movie with him was really, really great, really eye-opening.
Yeah, I imagine it would be. Yeah, like for me, it was a very private experience. Yeah. Last night at about 11 o'clock at night. But yeah, no, it. I kind of. Here's my problem.
Yeah.
And we might as well dig right into it.
Yeah.
I struggle with this movie as I struggle with anything that riles people up. Mm-hmm. Understanding why.
Why it riles people up?
Yeah, because to me, when I was watching this, what I felt like I was watching was was actually very fascinating in a certain way, because I've not read the book.
Yeah.
But I can only imagine that the book is an extremely personal account of this person's interpretation or beliefs about his faith, right?
Yeah.
And so we have what seems to be Scorsese's extremely personal interpretation of the author's extremely personal interpretation of his faith. And in that layer, I find it very difficult to understand. Like, I do understand that this is the kind of thing that gets the people who get riled up.
That's because you understand your relationship with religion, period, or any ideology as a personal thing. It is
right, and it bothers me that it could bother somebody else.
Yeah.
That somebody has this relationship with their faith.
When you're relating to people, or when we're talking about people who believe that their truth, there's very specific identifying of the truth, is the only truth, and therefore it is their duty to make sure everyone believes like them. You get into a mindset so foreign to how you view these same facts that it's very hard to get into that. And
Well, and for me, it's the exact opposite. I can't go in that other direction. I can't go to their mind. That mindset is impossible.
In a way, I feel lucky because
I can't make myself do it.
I grew up in a culture with that mindset. Not quite as fundamental as...
well, certainly not Molotov cocktail fundamental.
We're not bombing cinemas. But, we're not bombing abortion clinics either, thank God.
Yes.
But it is the same. It is a stepping stone on the path to where I was, is a stepping stone on the path that leads to people who do that sort of thing.
Right.
So, given that Jerry Falwell is one of the people that spoke out against this film, sight unseen, I'm sure, it wouldn't surprise me that...
It's always sight unseen.
It wouldn't surprise me that if my father found out that I watched this, he would be disappointed in me. Hi, Dad. I don't know that you listen to this. If you've made it this far, though, I do know that you have a tendency to keep track of what I do online. So, watch it. Here's
Mr. Glass.
Here's my take on the theology of this movie. A lot of Christians, and not just evangelicals, not just fundamentalists, not just right-leaning Christians, a lot of Christians have a problem, despite the fact that ostensibly Orthodox belief, by Orthodox I mean commonly accepted, not just the Orthodox Church belief,
right? Not big
O
group,
orthodoxy.
The little O. Yeah. Right, understood.
The Orthodox view of Christ, Jesus, is that he was fully human and fully God. And there's a lot of problem in accepting the humanity. Now, the Bible specifically says, the Gospels specifically state that Jesus was tempted in every way. And to their credit, the Promise Keepers, which was a big group in the late 90s.
Yes, I remember the Promise Keepers.
Which was certainly a conservative movement. But it was also about Christ-like manhood in there, and not in the sort of Mark Driscoll of today's sense of UFC fighter Jesus.
Right.
But to their credit, they accepted the movie on some terms because if Jesus is tempted in every way, and as Jesus is fully human, he needs to be tempted in every human way. And what is more human than the temptation of lust that we get a lot of here, but more importantly, what the true last temptation is here is the temptation to remain human, to not overcome what needs to be overcome.
Yeah, and to escape from that fate. Yeah.
So
well, it's interesting to me because in a lot of ways, I'm not a practicing Christian any longer, but this strikes me. I did not see this at any point during the time that I was a Christian.
Yeah.
But the funny thing to me is that what we're looking at here is basically a movie saying what at least I heard plenty of times when I was still attending church, which is, it's okay to be tempted.
Yeah.
It's what you do.
Yeah.
The choices you make. And that's what a lot of what this movie is about, is that, he is tempted, but he chooses the right path.
Yeah. One thing I really like about, there's a lot of things I like about the portrayal of Jesus in this movie. This movie, to me, the Jesus is, in the Gospels, as Jesus praying in the Garden of Gethsemane before he's arrested, before the crucifixion. This is biblical. This is in no way interpretation or extra biblical. It's not in no way interpretation. Everything's interpretation, but this is biblical. Jesus, straining himself so much that a common image, even among the Christianity that I grew up in, a common image is straining so much emotionally that he's literally sweating blood. and that's got some biblical basis too. But begging God to take the cup away from him, to not have this be the way. And that is the moment of Christ's humanity boiled down into one finite piece. And that is, this movie says it's not based on the Gospels, and it's not based on any specific Gospel, and they mess with timelines, and they mess with different ideas. They present the idea. It's kind of accepted in biblical scholarship that the Sermon on the Mount wasn't just like one sermon, that it's a collaboration of a lot of different things that were said. So it plays with that, but at the same time, its heart is in the humanity of Jesus, and that is central to the gospel for me.
Right. No. See, and that's the thing is like that's where for me where I really run into the sticky point about trying to understand the controversy is that okay, we did not sit down with the Bible and say, okay, next up on our script is this event, and I'm okay with that because I mean if you're not going to interpret it through your own eyes, what you're going to make, then there's no point in making it.
Well, yeah, and the other...
Like, the author and the director have to have some agency in what they do, or else it is...
The other side of that...
There's no reason to make it.
The other side of that is the people who would make a film solely based on a literal interpretation of the Bible, that is
you
their
can
own
get
agency.
at the Christian bookstores.
That is their own agency.
Exactly. That is
to insist on literalism.
Exactly.
To insist on this interpretation of literalism.
Yeah.
That is your own agency.
That's true. Yeah.
So part of the controversy, though, and I will point this out, not that it just to make us more sad, I think. Part of the controversy was before the movie was even in production, and what got this pushed back. Because originally this was going to be made in 1975 with
really?
With Sting as Pontius Pilate originally.
I kind of almost wish we even could it could go further back in time, but I'm sure the book wasn't even written at that point. But we could just go back through various pop stars until we're and then there was the original version had Buddy Holly as Pontius Pilate.
Well, the book was written in 1958, but so. I believe the author was dead by this point. I don't know when he died, but I feel like it was the early 80s. Anyway, what was I saying? Part of the controversy was that the belief that Jesus would be portrayed as a homosexual.
Okay.
And
is he portrayed as a homosexual in the book?
No.
Okay.
Not that I know of. One thing that will get us a lot of flack if the right people listen to this, hi Dad, that Thanasi pointed out is there is more biblical evidence of Jesus being gay than of Mary Magdalene being a prostitute.
Interesting.
Well, the Mary Magdalene, and that's one of my problems with this movie. Is that the scholarship wasn't exactly there until after this came out. Mary Magdalene as prostitute is a belief that stems from a pope in the 6th century, the same pope who codified the 7 deadly sins. He did a lot of things that weren't biblical.
Yeah, he took a lot of agency apparently.
He took a lot of agency. So Magdalene is prostitute. Magdalene being associated with the adulterous woman who Jesus stops the stoning of with he who's without sin cast the first stone. Magdalene being associated with Martha's sister, which they don't get into this, but that also gets conflated a lot. And Martha's sister Mary being the one who washes Jesus' feet with her hair and perfume. There's a lot of conflation in that, and some very, very prominent and even very conservative theologians have pointed out that the language that the Gospel of John uses when John describes himself as the the disciple who Jesus loved, there's something to that language that we're glossing over a lot. And that is an entirely different conversation and not something I want to throw out.
Right, not something we need to really get into,
But something...
But if the author pointed that out, it is somewhat relevant to why people were freaked out. But at the same time, like, it's not...
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of man-on-man kissing in this movie.
But from
it's greeting kissing, and even Paul in his letters, I can't remember which one specifically right now, perhaps multiple times, but he does insist on greeting one another with a holy kiss. And as far as I know, in the more Orthodox traditions, big O Orthodoxy, that holy kiss is often a extended lip kiss, not open mouth, but the same sort of kissing we see in this movie. The same of kissing we see in this movie.
That's from what I've come to understand from my encounters with various people, various cultures. That's a thing that happens, and it's maybe makes lots of modern Americans uncomfortable, but
indeed.
Not unreasonable.
But yeah, this is a movie. This is a movie about doubt and about struggle. It uses, as the opening even says, it is not necessarily a movie about Jesus in any historical sense, but about everyone, about the struggle between the flesh and the spiritual.
I found that really fascinating to read. Like, I get some of those opening title cards confused.
Yeah.
I probably should have gone back and watched them again before we recorded. Well, I was on time budgets.
Yes.
But yeah, I remember the initial quote by the author struck me as very poignant, and as I watched the film, really clicked with the film. And then there was the second title card that seemed like a disclaimer. I don't know if it was the second one or if there was another one. I can't remember how many there were at this point. But there was one that was a disclaimer that almost felt like,
yes,
oh, we had to put this on because
that's
people
the
would
one.
Lose their minds.
That's the one that contains the phrase "not based on the Gospels."
Yeah, and I found that kind of sad.
Yeah,
I was like,
that it needs
especially
to be said at all.
As I watched it, I was like, well, no, of course, I mean. This is a falsehood in a certain sense, because of course it's not directly based on a specific gospel, but obviously this person is interpreting a religion that they've been exposed to their entire lives.
Yes.
You can't make this work with, somebody could not just open up the Quran and make an equally poignant work who had not been exposed to that their entire lives, or any other religion's text, right? I mean,
everybody comes at it with their own lens. If the same person had interpreted the Quran without being within that community, they'd be, and even within being that community, they'd be attacked by the fundamentalists. But outside of that community, they'd certainly be attacked. And that's what I'm saying. Is like he only can make this. This film can only exist because this person, was exposed their entire lives to this religion, and it really brings us back to, oddly enough, the life of Brian. Yeah,
which is that they got into this thing where they were basically saying this movie is not about Jesus.
Yeah,
we all grew up in the Christian.
It's a little
religion,
easier to make that claim about the life. Of
Brian. Yeah. No, it is. It is more true about the life of Brian than it is about this. But my point is that they had to say that thing because people conflated the fact that it featured elements that they were familiar with from their religion with they were conflating those elements they were familiar with it being about that religion. And they made the point that we all grew up in a religion, one of the denominations based on this religion, and so that's what we have to work with. And in a certain sense, this movie is much more obviously about Jesus.
Yes.
Even more so than Life of Brian. But this person wants to make a book or a film about their personal faith journey. Yeah. The only way they can do that is about their faith. They can't make it about somebody else's faith.
Exactly.
And so it is, while it is, it is unfair to say that it is not based on the gospel, because obviously that's the religion they grew up in. That's what they based it on, what everything they had learned their entire lives. It is also not about that.
Yeah, you need to separate this from. This movie isn't claiming to be truth.
Right, exactly. This is
presenting a story, and it's their interpretive story. That's
right, and this is his personal journey and his personal experience with his faith. And so at the same time, saying it's not based in the gospel is somewhat disingenuous. At the same time, as you watch the film, it's like, well, duh.
Yeah.
Like, all you have to do is watch it from beginning to end, and you already know that it's not a literal interpretation of the Gospels.
Yeah.
So it's disgusting is what it is, Adam. That is necessary really to put that at the beginning.
The Archbishop of Los Angeles gets quoted in the essay as someone who, while not... He tried to distance himself from the protests, but he still said that it would be that it was a bad film. It was not something that he supported. Sight unseen, according to the essay. Always sight unseen. Thanasi tells me because he was living in San Francisco at the time and was friends with people involved. The Archbishop of San Francisco, who Thanasi insists that he called Archie. They were such associates. The Archbishop of San Francisco. Thanasi at the time, actually, it's important to know, before he became a Greek Orthodox monk, he was in Catholic seminary. He's led a very interesting life. And that is only the surface. I will be talking about this man for years, and whenever it's even related, I'm sure I will mention him in the podcast again.
I'm sure it'll come up again,
but
no doubt.
The Archbishop of San Francisco and some other higher ups in the San Francisco hierarchy, in a cathedral, had a preview before the premiere of the film. They watched it. And his response to it was, it will be confusing to people who are not intimately familiar with the Gospels. That's basically it.
That's not an unreal...
That is...
It is.
Yeah.
I do not even pretend to be as familiar... with the Gospels as my people in my family would like me to be.
Yes.
And it is, but at the same time, I'm, even with what knowledge I have picked up over whatever it was, 18 years of attending church, I can identify very clearly the elements that are very purposely things that the author and director added because that's what they wanted to add.
So yeah, like I said earlier, this movie plays with Christ as human, Jesus is human, and very deeply seated in Jesus as human. Whereas a lot of Christians seem to have discomfort with that, and I think that's very interesting because the alternative to that, and the emphasis put on is Jesus as fully God as well, and the Christian the Orthodox view is fully God and fully human, both. So a lot of modern day Christians, and modern day for the last 1,000 years even, lean toward God, and part of Christianity to me is identifying with Christ as being able to overcome. But when we get down to our disagreement here, it's the difference between Jesus being unable to sin and Jesus being able to not sin.
Okay.
So the common, what a lot of people want to believe, and the way they have problems here, is that they believe that Jesus was unable to sin. Being fully God, he was the perfect being, and therefore couldn't physically. Right. If he tried, he'd be stopped or something. I don't know. There's a lot of paths that can go down that don't make sense.
Yeah, okay. Well, you get into a lot of interesting
versus
semantic arguments.
Jesus being able to not sin. The resistance of temptation.
Right, which is what we get
Yeah.
in this film.
And my problem with the common view today is that Jesus, being fully God, and having so little to do with humanity that he was not even remotely fully human, that is very common. Jesus as that perfect, unable to sin being, that's a Gnostic belief. That is heresy of the oldest degree, as far as Christianity is concerned. Jesus. That is the definition of Gnosticism. In a lot of ways, was the belief that Jesus was not human, that he was just a spiritual being. And part of, in fact, the Gnostic Gospel of Judas, which is one of the sources on the idea that Judas was in cahoots with Jesus, that it was Jesus' plan that Judas was enacting. One of the justifications in the Gospel of Judas is that Jesus needed to be freed from this physical prison to fully encapsulate his spiritualness, so that he could exist as pure spirit. He needed to be killed. And the other half of the problem with that theologically is that if the resurrection is just a spiritual resurrection and not a physical resurrection, it undermines a lot of Christianity, which is why that's a Gnostic heretical belief and not orthodoxy.
Orthodox, yeah. Christianity.
Yeah. There's a lot to talk about theologically in here.
Yeah, there is, and it unfortunately, that's
one of the things I like. This is less extra biblical or non biblical, and more just alternative character interpretation. And I think looking at another view, or looking at something from a different perspective, is something that doesn't happen a lot in Christianity, but in any religion, in any ideology, even looking at it from the other angle, or from an infinite amount of other angles, is hard to do. It's like you having a hard time understanding people who would get angry about this,
which is in a certain sense is a failing of mine.
Yeah,
that I cannot understand.
Yeah,
but it's I try, but it doesn't work, and lots of people have that problem with their beliefs.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. It's very human to have that problem. But yeah. Where am I here?
Characterization.
Characterization.
Alternative characterization.
Yeah, and it's circling around the same points again and again. But Jesus, in portraying Jesus as so closely human, and I want to say that Jesus as fully human and not godly at all is itself heretical, but I don't think this movie says that. What this movie boils down to... No, it
doesn't.
Yeah. What this movie boils down to is something that there is no orthodox belief on, and that there's no finite, and this is a conversation we've been having for 2,000 years. What did Jesus know about his divinity, and when? And this movie,
and then we can't.
It's the struggling of that, and it's a very slow realization. And then he gets purified in the desert, and he says, "I'll speak to the people. I'll just open my mouth, and God will speak." And then that's great, and he preaches love, and then the love thing doesn't seem to be working out for him, so he gets tempted toward violence. And that's one thing I love about this movie is it gave me an answer to a question that's been in my head for a while. One thing that comes up when we're talking about Christian pacifism,
yes, is
how do we respond to Jesus driving out the money changers? That's obviously anger. That is an angry moment. And what I think the answer I think this movie gave me there is that is just one more temptation And Jesus drives them out angrily, yes, and maybe he gives in to that temptation in a way. But I think he's really being tempted to kill them. And that this movie presents
it
as
you see it in that movie. Yeah, you see that definitely in this movie, is that
he's being tempted to kill them, and he doesn't. So in that manner, he resists temptation.
Well, especially, like, the interesting thing is with the characterization of Judas in this film as being sent to kill collaborator who is Jesus at this time, which, I mean, is extra stuff, but it's interesting that he makes a point of saying, the things I love, and the things I hate, I kill.
Yeah,
and you kind of get that sort of when Jesus is driving the money changers out, is that like this
he's being tempted
he is
toward
not
the
going to kill the thing he hates. Yeah,
he's being tempted toward that zealotry, but he's not giving into that zealotry. And it's very important to that interpretation that remember that Judas here is a sort of his right-hand man. That Judas has known him the longest out of any disciples, but Judas is also a zealot and very much a anti-Rome radical.
Right.
So Judas is of the mindset that the Messiah will come with an army and destroy the oppressors, and it's that fight, and that that is a religious interpretation that we still struggle with today. That is the interpretation of Revelation that leads us to things like the Left Behind series. That is Jesus as conqueror destroying his enemies, whereas the Jesus of the Gospels is, as this movie says he is, change the heart and everything else falls into place. But you have to change the heart. Whereas Judas is arguing, no, you have to tear everything down so that you can change the heart.
Where the root is, whether or not it's the spirit or the body,
Yeah. And this movie is Jesus struggling between what he knows to be true, what he stated there, and what Judas, his trusted friend, is telling him to be true. And in the same way, in a much deeper way, that is Judas's betrayal of him. As far as this movie is concerned, it's Judas is constantly tempting him off the path that he knows that God has told him to be on. And I'm speaking off the cuff, and that's coming to mind. But I think, that's certainly a reading of it. It may not be the reading presented, but this is a movie where Jesus is constantly being tempted.
But also I think it's really interesting because I don't have enough background information to back me up, but I remember being told that a very common and popular interpretation of the coming of the Messiah prior to Jesus was that he would be a conqueror.
Yeah.
That he would, and then so in a way, Judas just represents what all people expected.
And that's
why is our Messiah not coming with an army?
The Zealots were the pinnacle of that movement in a lot of ways. And Life of Brian again talks a lot about those sort of people. All of the different splinter groups in Life of Brian are waiting for that Messiah. And Messiah's conqueror is there's certainly biblical evidence for it, and the Christian view is that Jesus is a conqueror, but he is not a conqueror in a military sense. He is changing the heart. It is love ultimately. Now another thing that this movie gets bows to that I don't think is necessarily. It's also not something we need to talk about too much. Adam Glass here with a little interruption. You've been listening to Lost in Criterion, but Pat and I have another podcast called Time Warp Pizza Party with our friend Jonathan Hape. It's a celebration of work you'd rather not have in your portfolio right now. We'd love to share your childhood poetry, that skit you wrote for Flag Day in junior high, or the secret recordings of your EDM alternative personality MC Kinley from freshman year. head over to timewarpizzaparty.com and share. Apologize for that little interruption. I don't know what happened, but I lost my internet connection.
Well, considering we're, thousands of miles apart from each other, it's actually kind of surprising this has never happened before.
yeah, it's a miracle we've made it this far. Anyway, I have no idea what I was talking about before that happened.
No, I don't either.
Sort of zealotry. And Judas tempted Jesus
Splinter Cells, and
yes.
You were talking about how in Life of Brian we see how the Splinter Cells kind of all diverge.
So that's a very
but all want the same thing.
That's a very common interpretation. I would argue that it is not. It is an interpretation that still gets a lot of play in biblical circles, or in Christian circles, despite the fact that it shouldn't. And I really believe that the Jesus of the Gospels is not one who, even when Jesus says, I came with the sword or whatever, I tear down this temple. There's a lot of violent imagery that he uses, but it's always a spiritual violence, I think. At least my interpretation.
But yeah, at least in this movie, we do get that kind of this is imagery, not a call to arms.
Yeah, even when he's much closer to a call of arms, he realizes his mistake, and steps back, and breaks down. So and he's calling, and again Judas is encouraging that call of arms, and everyone's mad. And I think this offers a really good interpretation for what happens between Palm Sunday and Easter. Why Jerusalem is so welcoming to him, to Jesus and to the disciples, proclaiming Hosanna and laying palm branches down as he enters the city. And then less than a week later, we're calling for his execution, and we're choosing Barabbas over Jesus to be released. And this movie, there's no meat to any argument you want to put forward as to why that happens, besides the fact that it's God's will because it had to happen. But this movie offers an explanation for that, and I think it's a pretty good one. It
actually does work. I mean, you don't find any logical. When you're watching it, you don't feel like there's a dissidence in what happens.
They
didn't provide a reason.
They were still expecting that Messiah, and then when he got there, and they discovered that's not what he was doing. A good number desert him. At least popular support deserts him. And we get. There's obviously a lot of foreshadowing in this movie, given that we open with Jesus building crosses for the Roman government.
Probably one of the most heavy-handed parts of the film.
Yes,
is the first 3 minutes where you've got Willem Dafoe kind of sizing it up, which was somewhat. I at first when I saw that honestly, I was a little bit worried.
Yes. No.
I was like, oh man, I am not going to enjoy this film.
Yeah. No.
But then it actually gets much better from there, so I'm glad it was not all that.
Yeah. And then later, as we're doing his first preaching, he says something about fighting the oppressors and fighting the rich, and before he can get to but we need to do it the right way,
everybody's turned to
half
crazy
off
murder.
To kill the rich already.
But it's kind of interesting because it does give you a really interesting sense of the environment that we're working in. As soon as he opens his mouth, their immediate reaction is, "Oh, we need to go burn some houses down and murder some people."
And that's it's still the same way people respond to ideologies and religion. It's right. It says this here. I've been thinking about that moment in the temple because my grandfather said something about it. He said someone was reading something about Christian churches who are solely preaching love, love and forgiveness for all, and there's biblical support for that. But he said, how do you balance that against the Jesus who went into the temple and drove the money changers out? And I would, it wasn't a conversation. It was an offhand comment he made, and I wasn't looking to get into a conversation, but I did hear the comment. So now, like I said, this movie kind of gives an answer to that. In that it is just further him being tempted, and if he's being tempted in every way, we get a lot of focus on that whole last act of him being tempted into humanity.
We do, which was really was one of the more fascinating parts of the film.
And it is absolutely fascinating. But at the same time, he is constantly being tempted toward just away from his path in whatever way it is. And ultimately we get to that. I am conflicted. I don't know how to react to Paul's characterization in this film. One, because the first time we meet him, he is the Pharisee enforcer who kills Lazarus to quell Jesus' message, which is. It is not Paul in any tradition. I talked to Thanasi about this a lot. But there is a very early belief that Lazarus was assassinated by the Romans to try and quell Christianity. And that's a very, very early... that's like early 200s, mid 100s sorts of beliefs. So, and it's historians talking about it. That doesn't mean that it's true.
Right, it just means that that's
But it is,
an interpretation.
We have to at some point, we have to draw the line of what we accept as history and what we accept as people talking. I think that I don't know. That's an entire different conversation too. So.
Yeah, that is. There's a heck of a rabbit hole to go down there. But
yeah. So, but then we get back to Paul after in this vision that Jesus has a death dream, maybe, or maybe it's actually happening and he just travels back to himself. It's
which are both
in the novel.
Reasonable.
In the novel, it's more. Yeah, in the novel, it's more clearly meant to be a dream sequence.
Okay.
It's stated as such. In this, it's not necessarily that. But we do get a point where Jesus finds Paul preaching the resurrection. He gets into an argument with Jesus, and Jesus says, "No, that's not how it happened." And Paul says, "It doesn't matter. My Jesus is more powerful than you. My Jesus is an idea and a belief," and that has certain theological underpinnings and ramifications that I don't like. I'll be honest.
Yeah, but at the same time, if we are imagining that this is a dream, and Jesus is trying to get through this and this temptation, that's exactly what he needs to be told.
Yeah, and this is
what you chose is not.
Yeah,
doesn't mean anything.
If this is a dream, then this is God or Jesus' subconscious pushing in on that dream to tell him it has to happen this way, so that because the belief needs
because
to be
what you want doesn't amount to anything. No, it didn't bother me too much because once I know that this is not. I mean, at first I was kind of, because at the beginning of the film they tell me, well, this is not based in gospel, and I've already seen that this is a fairly loose personal interpretation. I was like, wow, are we going to end this film with Jesus not dying on the cross? Because that would be really, really interesting to watch as well.
I knew,
and we get pretty far down that rabbit hole.
I knew from the appearance. I knew from the appearance of the guardian angel that it was the devil, that it was Satan in disguise. It was clear to me. One, because the last time we saw the devil in the desert temptation, he says he'll be back.
Yeah, see, like, after it's revealed, I was like, no, I was just an idiot, wasn't I? But at the same time, I was like, it would be really, for me, I also find a lot of there's something interesting. I was also trying to see where they would go with it until like the end. Like, could we end the movie before? There's too
much wish fulfillment in that sequence for me.
Right,
too.
There is. Yeah, it is.
When the angel says there's only one woman, so it doesn't matter if you're sleeping with more than one.
Right. Yeah. No, there is a lot of that kind of stuff. But it was still fascinating to watch, and I sort of was like, oh man, are we just going to go completely off the rails? Because I have not really any preconceived notions about this film.
Everyone showing up at Jesus' deathbed to berate him, Judas especially, to say, no, you did this wrong. You betrayed me by not sticking to what you convinced me was the way. You won me over, and then you didn't go through with it. Is so... I can understand anger's... Like, I understand the controversy here. I understand the anger at that. The anger that Jesus is portrayed as someone who could have chosen not to fulfill the path. That is possible. That is very uncomfortable. I can see it being very uncomfortable for a lot of people. It is not necessarily a problem for me, more not because I don't think it's possible that he could, but because I think it's possible that he could, but he didn't.
Right, and like,
that
for
is
me
that temptation.
Also,
so,
and that's why for me it was such a kind of exciting thing to watch. It was like kind of more. It was less. I didn't think they were gonna. Yeah, I knew something had to happen, but it was like, how far will we go with this before we get back on the rails? You know what I mean? It was kind of. Yeah. It was. I really enjoyed that entire sequence. And I for me, that was probably one of the most rewarding parts of the whole film, is this, like, following this, our director and our author's trip down this almost kind of, it reminds me of a sort of weirdly biblical version of those, like, what if novels that you can find in, like, Barnes and Noble. Yes. It's like, okay, so if Abraham Lincoln hadn't died, then he would have been turned into Cyber Abraham Lincoln and defeated Adolf Hitler. Yeah. It only biblical. So that was for me, that was such an enjoyable experience that, like, I kind of didn't want it to end. But I mean, the writing became on the walls as we went further and further along. But I wasn't sure exactly how they were going to get back on the rails. So, So there's something I wanted to talk about that's totally non-theological. And that is the fact that...
We probably should talk about parts of this that aren't theological.
There's the fact that there are a few moments in this movie... Like, okay, so let me rephrase. Let me start from the beginning of what I'm trying to say. Period pieces, which anything biblical has to be a period piece, basically, tend to be somewhat immune to some of the problems that present themselves in other types of works, in that they... can exist outside of the period which they were created, and therefore not suffer from, like, for example, if you go back and watch RoboCop, which we watched, it suffers somewhat because, things have changed. The world is different than it was when it was made, and because it's set in the future and things have progressed in a path that is obviously different. Yeah. Whereas if you go back in time, you don't have that problem, right? If you make... other than the fact that everybody seems to think every single Roman person spoke the Queen's English.
Well, yeah, we do. We do. I mean, our one problem with that is that they're still based in the interpretation of history at the point where they're made.
Right. So, at the time they were created. Yeah. And so there are some problems, but, period pieces tend to be more immune to that problem. But man, there were times where this movie was so 80s it hurt. You know what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
Like every so often, I was like,
I think
especially the one that got me the most. Okay, I gotta share
Yeah.
is the fact that we gather the disciples via montage.
Yes,
basically.
We do have a walk,
and I was like,
along the beach, gathering more and more crowds.
We are seconds away from Eye of the Tiger here.
The end of
how did this happen?
The end of Buckaroo Banzai.
Yeah, I was like, I know, like at that moment, I was like, man, it just became the '80s in this.
I think the Peter Gabriel soundtrack really adds to that too.
Yeah, that's also true. Yeah, there's a lot of things like that, and that was just something that like I noted. I was like, we at a few moments, we are moments away from rock and roll Jesus.
Yeah. Well, that's one thing I liked about the soundtrack is it's sparsely used. But when you start to notice it, and maybe I just didn't notice it.
No, I did notice it a couple of times.
But when you start to notice it, it's because it's jarringly electric guitar and bass
and maybe
Peter
that's just
Gabriel
because I'm not expecting that. But like, but man, when we flew into montage, I was like, really, really,
no, it's definitely there. It's definitely there.
And then the only other thing that I really, I don't know why it's in the film. Maybe you have a logical interpretation, but I found it upsetting. Was that noise?
Which noise?
I don't know how to describe it any other way, but there are a few points where they are trying to impart, as far as I can tell, on the audience discomfort. When the film fades to orange at the end, and it happens a couple other times, there's this god-awful noise. This piercing nightmare noise that happens. That if you're watching it on headphones, like I was, hurts, is actual pain.
I think throughout the movie, and I didn't notice it, but I watched it on the television, so maybe I didn't. Perhaps they were trying, in the same way that Darren Aronofsky's Pi uses really disjointed soundtrack noise. They're trying to sell psychosis in a way.
Yeah, no, it does feel like that, and that was my interpretation of what was going on. It's like we are supposed to feel, but it happens a few times, and I was hoping you would have noticed it. But I think even if I were watching it on TV, I would have noticed if it was sufficiently loud. But like, there's just this piercing, like if you imagine every scream in the world, dubbed over itself. Infinitely, you get this noise.
Yeah.
And it is horrendous if you are wearing headphones.
One thing I will say, not on that noise, but on the weird colorization at the end. that's okay, let's leave it in moment. The camera that was recording at that moment broke. And
really?
Yeah. Because you can see that in part of it, it's like the film is breaking because you can see the seams of the film come into frame. But yeah, the camera broke and the film at that point was ruined and they just left that in. Which I think is an interesting...
I kind of like
even accidental. Accidental, it's a very interesting way because this is a movie that ends with "It is finished, it is accomplished" is how they translate it for here. And another way I think I could see a lot of Christian groups having a problem with this that might be a legitimate problem to have is that it's not a movie that ends with the resurrection. It ends with the death and the promise of resurrection, but still it ends with the death. Fading into broken film right after that death eliminates the need to question what happens next. I think it offers it. Yeah. It offers it up to the audience as to what happens next.
But at the same time, like, if again, I have trouble, Adam, dealing with it, but like, it's a foregone conclusion.
Yeah.
The hard part was him dying.
Yeah.
The resurrection is a given. It's a known quantity.
Yeah.
If you kill if you kill God,
he's coming
God
back.
Doesn't stay dead.
And we've already established again, and maybe one of the reasons there is some logic to people not being mad about that moment is we've already established that Lazarus raised from the dead. So we know
know that this is a thing that happens.
That's a thing that can happen. By Jesus'
like
power,
I didn't even think about that, but I guess I could see there being controversy about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, for me it was like, well, it's Jesus. Duh.
Yeah. Duh. We don't need to know that. But we didn't start with his birth. We don't need to end with...
Right. We don't need to start in a manger here, folks.
Yeah.
Like, we all know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Assuming you're in a relatively Christian exposed nation, it's not something you need to be told outright in film.
Yeah.
You know, but no, yeah, like I kind of like the broken film ending, but it was kind of overwhelmed by the screeching.
By that sound. Yeah.
Yeah, like literally to the point I had to take my headphones off. It was painful.
I'm sorry. Are you sure that it's not your computer breaking?
No. That was I have a very specific system by which I watch.
Okay.
These movies. It's late at night. My family is asleep. I wear headphones that are hooked up to my TV, and it's just I think it's a much more abrupt noise if you're listening in headphones than it is if you're watching on regular TV. But I found it very painful. But you know, that was just a weird thing that I was like, I understand kind of, because they do it a couple other times where I was like, okay, I understand. We're in a certain way kind of supposed to be as uncomfortable as Jesus is at this point.
Yeah.
But then at the end I was like, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
So
yeah. So yeah. I don't know if I have anything else to say.
I just like to say
beautiful
that,
film, but we can't.
I was pleasantly surprised by how much I liked this movie. I was not sure, because my only other real exposure to films that focus on Jesus would be The Passion of the Christ. Yeah. Which I was
on the bright side
to watch.
On the bright side in this one, Jesus didn't invent tables. So
well, I don't remember a lot about The Passion of the Christ except for the fact that I didn't want to be there.
I think I've shared this before, but I'll share it again. One of my favorite things about The Passion of the Christ is I never saw it. But I was home from college and visiting my parents' church, and someone in conversation the group I was with had gone to see it together the previous night, and they were going to talk about it, and they turned to me. The leader of the conversation turned to me and said, "Have you seen it? I don't want to spoil anything for you." And I said, no, it's okay. It's okay. I'm familiar with the source material.
Oh, wow.
I'll be all right.
That's the best thing I've ever heard.
Yeah.
No, but like, I'll tell you one thing. If I get to choose between the two, I know which one I'm picking.
Oh, you just like this one for John the Baptist, sex-crazed. Well, it's not really sex-crazed, but there's a lot of naked bodies undulating.
No, that was pretty gross, but like...
that was weird.
John the Baptist was kind of awesome,
I'll tell you,
though, how
biblically,
crazy he was.
Biblically, John the Baptist as the crazy guy who lives in the desert and has a religious movement, that is perfectly... How they chose to interpret that as this sort of rock and roll guru was weird, but
it
still
fits the
fine.
80s, so...
Okay. And it fits the 80s. That was another moment where I just kind of rolled my eyes at things.
Yeah,
because I understand what they're trying to do, and I understand where they're coming from in trying to do it. But it's still just really weird. And another point where probably the more fundamentalist people might have an issue in that biblically John is supposed to have immediately recognized Jesus not only for who he is but for what he is, and then the heavens open up and the doves come down, and a voice from heaven says, "Yeah, you're right." Whereas in this, not only does John ask Jesus who he is, but maybe kind of in an accusatory term, so almost in a tell me who you are, so that you accept
entirely,
it.
I was not too
I don't
upset
feel
by
that's
that.
too different.
But
he does.
You need to tell me that you are who you are.
Yeah, I think that's okay. He's still a crazy guy.
Yeah, he's definitely a crazy guy in the desert,
surrounded by crazy people. But surrounded by crazy people, he points to the right way, I guess. And they have him put to death while Jesus is in the desert, and I think that's interesting because I just don't know the timeline on that. we've talked about that slightly before because there's an allusion to it in The Night Porter that Herod's daughter requests John's head on a platter, and that's why he's put to death. Which is weird because it's seemingly the way that's recorded in the Bible. It's almost as if there's not necessarily an outright political reason for it, or even religious reason. She's just a bad person.
Yeah, crazy about heads on platters.
Yeah. And as I recall, that's in Acts, not in any of the Gospels. So it's possible that it happened after Jesus' life, and to have it happen here and then not really show his reaction to it happening is a little weird. But at the same time, he's on a mission at that point. He gets back and he's ready for things.
Yeah.
So, and that's, one thing that this movie does a lot is Jesus thinks he knows what he's doing or has no idea what he's doing, and he's focused, and then he loses the focus, and then he's focused again, and he loses the focus, and eventually he loses the focus so bad that he's married Mary and Martha and has 6 kids.
Yeah, as often it's completely left the rails. But but again, that makes that made this one of the things that made this story so much more engaging than I guess he purely biblical tale would be. Exactly, you get to watch those things. You get to. Well, there is a story here.
This is a story that has biblical basis, and one of the issues with the modern church engaging people is that they don't want to have this. They don't want to show a doubtful, a fearful Jesus. They don't want to show a Jesus struggling, because it suggests he's too human, and they want him to be perfect. But again, the Orthodox view is that Jesus is fully human and fully God. So you've got to come to terms with that. And this movie takes a lot of steps in the right way to come to terms with that.
And that's what that's a lot of what I think anybody who enjoys this film picks up on is that what we are really watching, it does ask you to come to terms with it because that's the way the film is. That's what film is, right? But at the same time, we're actually watching these people. Yeah, we're watching our author and our director come to terms with the same things that they're asking us to come to terms with, and I think that's
true.
Exactly what you want in any good film. Is you're watching the director and the writer, but usually the director, deal with what they're up against. And then they're asking us to do the same thing that they're going through, basically come along for the ride as we all try to deal with this. And the net result is, I think, a really good film. So,
yeah, I agree. I really liked this. I will recommend this to the people I think would like it, and not recommend it to my family because they'll call me a heretic and kick me out. Hi, Dad.
I will not recommend this because I live in Japan and people will look at me like I'm crazy.
They will just. You live in a country that puts Christmas decorations up of Santa on a cross. So
yeah, things are weird here. What can I say?
Yeah, Christianity has a different sort of view in Japan.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not something we need to get into, but yeah, no, it's I don't need to. I'm not going to go around recommending this to anybody, but it's nice for me to have it in my personal catalog of things I've watched. So
I think for you, a lot of our movies, even the ones you really like, you can't go around recommending to people.
The only one I've ever recommended was 400 Blows. I've purposely recommended that.
I think 400 Blows is pretty universal.
It is
a lot of bases
watchable by anyone. I think.
But like the Archbishop of San Francisco said, if you don't have the right basis, this is a very confusing
it's just very confusing movie. Yeah. So this is not something any Japanese person I know needs to watch. So
yeah. Well, there you go. But anyway. Thank you once again for listening. Sorry for the technical difficulties.
We have no idea how long this podcast was because we have a 15-minute pause right in the middle.
So if that pause is shorter than 15 minutes, I apologize because we're running a little longer, certainly longer than we have in the last few weeks. But thank you once again for listening. Next week we'll be talking about Ingrid Bergman's 1975 adaptation of the Mozart opera, The Magic Flute. and it's a treat.
Oh, I'm
as well.
Yes. Ooh,
these were
exciting.
It has been rare that we have watched two movies back to back that I have enjoyed both of them.
That we
so
both
much.
like, yeah. So.
Yeah. So we'll talk about that next time, and we'll see you again.
All right. See you then.
You've been listening to Lost in Criterion, a production of With Two Brains. The show is hosted by Adam Glass and John Patrick Owatari Dorgan. Jonathan Hape did the music, and Adam Glass also edited it all together. Feel free to contact us by email via lostincriterion@withtwobrains.com or join us on the web at www.withtwobrains.com.